Today's video is a little bit special. I'm going to be making the first big batch of a hot sauce recipe I've been working on for the last 2 years. And I think I've perfected it. It tastes delicious. I can't wait to get it into your hands so you can tell me what you think. And I'm going to show you pretty much everything about how it's made right after this. I get asked quite often, can you ferment dried peppers? And if so, how do you do it? Well, you're going to learn how to do that in this video. Over here we have some fresh peri-peri straight out of the greenhouse. And here we have some dried peri-peri. Now, I've been picking my peri-peri peppers as soon as they've been ripening, and I've been dehydrating them to make sure that I have enough for this sauce, because I've been planning this for a little while. I need to figure out how much these would have weighed before I dried them. Now, the easier way to do that would have been to weigh them before I dried them, but I didn't think ahead with that one. But there's another way we can do this, and we just need a rough estimate. The fresh peri-peri are 12 grams, and the dry peri-peri 2.8 grams. That'll be important for a step later on in the process. The first part of this process is to create a starter with these fresh peppers. Now what that means is we're going to be creating an environment that the lactobacillus is going to reproduce, and we're going to be able to use all that lactobacillus that's going to be created with a small amount of peppers to actually ferment the rest of the peppers that are all dried. The reason we're doing this is because dried peppers are not going to have all the lactobacillus necessarily that is on here, on the fresh peppers. And even if it does have any left, with the step that I'm going to be doing a bit later on in the process, I'm definitely not going to have any lactobacillus on there. So let's get started. Let's get this fermenting and we'll be able to continue with the process. Neck, and let's just squeeze out as much of the air as you can. The method I'm going to use to keep this submerged is something I've done in the past, and that is to use some sort of vegetable. Now, I've used onion in the past. I think I've used cabbage as well. Well, I know I have, but I don't know if I've shown it on video. But that's what I'm going to be using today, is some cabbage. Now, the reason I'm using cabbage is because lactobacillus is quite prominent on cabbage as well. And it's the same type of lactobacillus as you'll find on peppers or pretty much any plants, which is Lactobacillus Plantarum. You don't want to go and get a starter culture from the health store or something like that, which claims to be lactobacillus. It is lactobacillus, but it's a different strain, and I prefer to just keep it somewhat natural, just to help the process along. So what we're going to do here is stick the cabbage there, and that should keep stuff below the liquid line. And for the airlock, I'm going to use some brine. You want to make sure that the bottom of the airlock does not touch the liquid, because all that'll happen is when the pressure starts building in here, it'll just push the liquid up through the airlock and make a mess. So that there is ready to start fermenting. I'm going to put a label on it, and we're going to stick that inside the fermentator. It's been a month now since we started this batch of peri-peri in the fermentator. And during that time, about 2 weeks ago, I started a second small batch of peri-peri. This one here I did inside my vacuum sealed bags, and I mashed it up, as you can see over there, and that is fermented nicely. We can see the air pocket that is created. Now it's time for us to do the next step, and this is where it gets interesting. This is where it's a little bit different, and I'm going to show you the method I'm going to use to be able to ferment dried peppers. Before we get started with the dry peppers, we're going to need to first process this over here. This is obviously already blended. I'm happy with that. This one here, however, we need to blend that up because I used whole peppers. So let's first just open that up and give it a smell. Smells good, and you can see there's no growth on there. Even though the cabbage looks a bit yellowed, it's actually perfectly fine. I'm going to take that out. Just need to get some gloves on. So we're going to get rid of this cabbage. That was just to hold this all down. I was just being ultra cautious, and I wanted the extra lactobacillus that was in there. So let's just get rid of that because it's not part of the sauce. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take some measurements here of the pH, because I'm going to measure the pH throughout this process, just to make sure that what I'm going to be doing with the dried peppers is going to be, you know, doing the right thing essentially. But to measure the pH, I'm first going to need to just blend this up. Now, typically when I blend these peppers up, I would get rid of the brine, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to waste any of the lactobacillus. Essentially, this is what I would consider a starter, and it's going to start the fermentation with the bigger amount of the dried peppers that we have over here. Oh, it's gorgeous smell. Wow, I love it. So let's get this open as well. I'm going to add this in to this fermentation. Actually, it'd be good a bit of an experiment here. What I can do is test the pH of this here, and then I'll test that as well afterwards, and we can see which one got to a lower pH. I'm kind of guessing this one might have, even though that one's been going for longer. So, I don't know if you can make that out, but that is 3.9. I think it's settled at 3.9. So I'll make a note of that. It's just good to keep records of these things. And another thing I want to do is make sure I clean this off. And let's quickly blend this up and see what the pH is of this one. Okay, so this one's actually a little bit higher, 4.2, but still well below the 4.6 that we need. And yeah, I was kind of expecting that would be a bit lower than that, but I think that might be possibly because of the brine that I've left inside there. Obviously going to be diluting the pH, the lactic acid. So I'm going to add this into this mix, and then we'll blend it up together and use that to start it all up a bit later on after we've prepared our dried peppers. So for now, this is just going to be put to the side until we're ready to use it. Let's start working with the dried peppers. Let me explain what I'm going to be doing. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is rehydrate these peppers. To know how much water to add back to these peppers, you're going to need to figure out the difference between your fresh peppers and your dry peppers. This is why I weighed my peppers earlier on in the video. It's so I could work out roughly how much water was lost. So essentially, I've worked out that if I multiply the weight of my dry peppers by 3.3, I'm going to get the amount of water that I need in terms of liters. Now, the reason for the heat is it's going to help it absorb the moisture a little bit easier. But another thing we're going to do to help this absorb moisture is we're going to blend it inside this pot. So let me just get this started, and then we'll start blending it just to help this break down a bit easier, especially for when we're doing the actual fermentation. You should get this to a boil. There's another reason that we're putting this on some heat, not only to rehydrate these peppers, but it's also to kill any potential bacteria that might be existing on these peppers. Because they're as dry as they are, there shouldn't be too much risk there at all, but this just helps keep everything nice and safe. Once you've blended this up really well and you've brought it up to a rolling boil, keep it like that for around about 10 minutes, and then you want to switch it off and you're basically going to let it cool down a bit because it's way too hot. It will kill the lactobacillus if you add in your starter. So you need to let that come down to around about 30 degrees Celsius. And what that allows it to do is just really kickstart the process and get the lactobacillus feeding on what's inside the pot. Of course, there are other ingredients going into this sauce. Now, I'm happy to share with you what those ingredients are. It's going to be on the bottle anyway, so I'm not hiding anything. But the amounts I'm using and the stage at which I'm adding these ingredients, that's something that I'm going to keep to myself because I am trying to create a signature sauce here. One thing I will say is make sure that you add salt at this stage while we're rehydrating the peppers. The salt is standard practice for fermentation. Remember that we are still fermenting. We're going to be using the starter to ferment the dried peppers that we have just rehydrated here. So make sure you add salt. Standard practice, 2% to 3%. That's normally where I go for. I've gone a bit higher than that for this one here, and not for the fermenting side of things. It's not like you need more because of this process, but it's because I need more salt for the recipe I'm doing. Make sure you don't go above 8% salt. 8% and above, the lactobacillus is not going to be in the best place. So they prefer a range between about 2-3% and 8% as a maximum. So land somewhere in between and you should be fine. The other ingredients that are going to be in here, or maybe already in here, is turmeric, garlic, and a good quality white wine vinegar. So turmeric is an interesting spice. It has many claimed health properties that I'm quite fascinated with. There's quite a lot of research that's gone into turmeric and how good it is for you. But have a look online. I'm not going to go into details about that. Obviously, chilies have their own health benefits as well. That there's a lot of research done on that actually, on capsaicin and the health benefits of chilies. But I think the combination of the turmeric with the chilies, it's going to make a lovely sauce, but it's also going to be potentially a bit of a healthy sauce as well. So do some research on that yourself. I'm not making any health claims here, so don't quote me on this stuff. But if you go and look online, I'm sure you'll find lots of information. So let me carry on with this. I'm going to now wait for this to cool down. I'm going to put this into another fermenting bucket once it is at the right temperature. I'm going to add in my starter, and we're going to let that ferment for another month or so. So let me get on with this. Next time I'm on camera, we'll be ready to sieve out all this lovely juice from the fermented peppers, and we'll be ready to start blending that with our vinegar. So let me get on with this, and I'll see you very soon. Let's see how the fermentation has got on, measure the pH, and get it ready for the next steps. That looks absolutely beautiful and smells amazing. I really can't wait to try this sauce once I've finished it off. But it's looking really good. I can't see any problems with it. And I guess the real test is to see what the pH is. That just looks perfect. I'm hoping the pH is going to be under 4 for what we've done here, and then I'll be a very happy man. I know I mention this every time I use my pH meter, but I have calibrated this. Make sure if you are going to be doing these sort of sauces that you not only have a pH meter, but you have a calibrated pH meter. So I did 2-point calibration. There's a pH 4 and a pH 7. And this should be ready to go. Give it a bit of a stir in there and see what we have. Wow. So I hope that's visible on camera. That should be there. 3.5. I am super, super happy with that. It gives me an extra confidence. I'm selling this stuff to you guys. Anything below 4 and I'd be 100% happy. But when I get down to that low, I know that I've had a very successful fermentation. So that's fantastic. We're ready to do the next steps. I'm not going to show all that because I've got a bit of work to do here. But basically, I'm going to be putting this into a bigger container and I'm going to be mixing in the vinegar – and we're going to be blending that all up and leaving it to sit for a couple of weeks. I learned quite a few things during this process, and probably the biggest one, the biggest time saver, would have been to process the fermented peppers before adding them to the vinegar. So what I did is I added the whole peppers, all the mash and everything into vinegar. I blended it up and I stuck it away and let it sit and pull all the flavors out of the peppers into the vinegar and sort of, do its thing. That was a pain in the backside, because when it came to actually using the food mill to get the liquid out of the whole mix, instead of processing just a small batch of, let's say, 2 kilograms of peppers, I'm instead processing, 4 kilograms, because I'm including all the vinegar as well. And it just doubles the amount of time, especially if you're doing larger batches. So what I will do next time is I will use the food mill on the peppers themselves before I add them to the vinegar, and get all the liquid out of them. Really just get as much as I can out of the peppers with that food mill, squeeze it right through, and then mix it in with the vinegar. It'll make the whole process go a lot quicker. And I just doubled the amount of time that I spent on this because of that one step that I missed. The other thing I learned is these fermentations, when you add a starter to it, it really does a great job, and it kicks off that fermentation so quickly. There's no gradual fermentation. This thing just kicks into high gear almost instantly. Normally when you ferment, the first 3 or 4 days, the lactobacillus is multiplying, and it's getting to a point that it's starting to do its job, and it propagates throughout the fermentation. When you add a starter directly to food, essentially, for the lactobacillus, which in this case were the peppers, the dry peppers that we added, the lactobacillus just goes on a feeding frenzy. The first or second day that this was going on, my bucket that I was fermenting in, it pretty much wanted to explode. It was expanded. I'm sure I have some pictures to show you up on the screen now, but it was nuts. And I couldn't actually, I had to process some of that stuff. I had to pull it out, put it into a smaller bucket. So I ended up having 2 buckets that I was working from. And yeah, that was a bit of a pain. So next time I'll definitely leave a lot more headroom at the top of the bucket, just to allow the process to kick in without it expanding and trying to blow out the airlock. So that was another lesson learned. Definitely take into consideration the fermentation is going to kick off a lot quicker when you add a starter, which is good, but it's also, just take into account. One other thing to point out is do not throw away your mash that you pull out of your sauce. So I have some over here, and this is going to be fantastic once I dry it out, and I'm going to actually make a lovely dry spice. I may be putting that up for sale, but we'll see. I'm sure my brother's going to end up wanting a bunch of it as well, because he absolutely loves peri peri as much as I do. So we'll see how that goes, but I'll let you guys know. But yeah, don't throw away this beautiful stuff. It's not waste, and it's definitely something that can be used. Whether you're using it for a dried spice or whether you're using it frozen and just putting it in as flavoring inside your cooking, it's a fantastic resource. So don't throw it away. There we go, the finished hot sauce, and another beautiful label by Mrs. ChilliChump. Thank you so much. Go check her out. She's on Instagram. She's posting as Mrs. ChilliChump, and give her a follow. She's actually posting up a little bit more than I am at the moment. I just really have not had the time. So go check it out. All that's left to do now is actually taste this hot sauce. But before I do, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the name. I couldn't exactly call this ChilliChump's signature sauce, although that was an option at one point. I ended up reaching out to my patrons on Discord, and I asked them what their suggestions were. They came up with some great suggestions, which I might just use in some future sauces, but I ended up going with a name that is actually quite close to my heart, and but a bit of an African theme with the sauce, the nature of the sauce being a peri peri type sauce, which is an African bird's eye, essentially. And the name I went with is Inyami. Inyami is an African word. Now, there's something called the Inyami Nyami, which is the Zambezi river god. It's meant to be a mythical creature that lives in the Zambezi river, and it also lives in Lake Kariba, which is in Zimbabwe, which is where I was born. And it's something I've grown up hearing stories about, and I actually have a tattoo of the Inyami Nyami, so I'll try and put it up on the screen, not my tattoo, but what the Inyami Nyami actually looks like. And I thought this is just a perfect name because Inyami also means a lot of other things in various other African languages. One of them means to eat, so that's pretty apt for what this is. Enough of that. Let's get to tasting this and see where it lands on the heat scale. I have my ideas of where I think it's going to land, but we're also going to compare it to the heat of a Tabasco sauce. It just gives me a bit of a way to give you guys a bit of a fair sort of comparison. So if I'm tasting this, I'm sure the majority of you are going to have some Tabasco sauce in your house. If I compare the heat of this to this, then you should have a good idea of where this sits. First up is the Tabasco. So I'm just going to put a few drops in there. Such a great smell. Well, that's Tabasco sauce. It's tangy vinegar, pretty much. I think that it's meant to be around, 3,000 to 5,000 on the Scoville scale. It's a delicious hot sauce. It really is. It's not going to blow your head off, of course. It's not meant to, but it's great tasting and it adds so much flavor to various meals. Now let's try this one. When I was making this sauce, I did think to myself, should I thicken it up, with xanthan gum, which I could have done. It is quite liquidy, just because of how it's made. Less liquidy than Tabasco, I think. But I ended up not adding any xanthan gum. I didn't really want to add too many additives. But we'll see what your feedback is with this first batch. And if it's something that you think it needs a little bit of thickness, then I'm open to suggestions, and I might change it for the second batch, or maybe make a alternate version of this which is a bit thicker. But let's give this a go. Oh, it smells really good. So let's try it out. I've just had the Tabasco. Ooh boy, that's a lot. That's got a lovely texture. It really has. It's still a lot. It's a totally different kind of heat. Tabasco burns pretty much straight away as you eat it. This one here, the sweetness of the white wine vinegar comes through. But then the heat builds up quite a bit. It's not a ridiculously hot sauce. It's a little bit hotter than Tabasco. I would consider this as a replacement for Tabasco in terms of the heat level. It has a very different heat profile, so it does build up a bit more. But if you are chasing the heat, if you're chasing some seriously hot sauce, this is not going to be the one for you. I think it'll go with quite a few different things. I think especially nice with chicken, of course, peri peri, I always go there first. But also splash some on some eggs on toast. That'll taste great as well. But yeah, that's really, really, really tasty. So I'm happy with that. I hope that you guys are going to enjoy this as well. It is up for sale right now, so make sure you go and get yourself a bottle. And I'm really excited to see what you guys think of it. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, especially around the dry peppers and how to process them and get them to ferment. Hopefully that's useful for you. And until the next video, stay spicy.